It was supposed to be a simple task, getting fitted for my wedding tuxedo. A routine appointment, just another step in the life I had planned. But that day, everything changed. As I stood there, under the bright lights, feeling the careful hands of the tailor, something shifted. His touch lingered just a little too long, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't as ready for the future I thought I wanted. What do you do when everything you've planned starts to crumble in an instant? This was the moment that changed everything. You know, life has a funny way of making us ignore the things we don't want to face. For years, I convinced myself that my feelings for Antonio were just a fleeting thought, something that could easily be dismissed. After all, I was getting married to Sarah, the woman I thought I was supposed to be with. She was everything I was supposed to want, a stable, loving partner, a future that made sense. But as I stood in front of Antonio, his hands gently measuring me for a tuxedo I was never supposed to wear, something in me stirred. I had spent so long pushing those feelings down, pretending they were nothing more than an accident of the heart. But in that moment, as his fingers grazed my skin, I realized I had been lying to myself. This wasn't just a moment of physical attraction. It was something deeper, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I had been hiding behind the comfort of what I knew. My life with Sarah, the certainty of our future. Yet with every subtle touch, every lingering second that passed in his presence, Antonio made me question everything. The truth was, I had felt something for him for far longer than I was willing to admit. But fear, responsibility, and the expectations of the world around me had kept me locked in a cage of my own making. As his hands worked their way across my body, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. Antonio's touch was different. It wasn't just the hands of a tailor. It was the hands of someone who saw me, not just the man I was expected to be. And that scared me. But in that fear, there was also clarity. I had been hiding from my truth for far too long. What happens when the life you've been planning suddenly doesn't feel right anymore? What happens when you finally acknowledge what's been buried deep inside you for years? Antonio had unlocked something I wasn't ready to face, and it was terrifying. But sometimes, the most important moments in life don't come when we're ready. They come when we're least expecting them, shattering the illusion we've spent so long building. And with that, everything changed. But it wasn't over yet. There are moments in life that feel like a pause, where everything slows down, and you're left standing in the middle of it, not knowing whether to move forward or step back. I never thought a wedding fitting would be one of those moments. But as Antonio's hands brushed across my chest, measuring my body with precision, the world around me seemed to melt away. Every thought, every doubt, gone. All that remained was the undeniable pull between us. I had walked into that fitting room with a plan, with my future mapped out in front of me. I was getting married to Sarah. This was the next step, the culmination of everything I thought I wanted. But Antonio, he made me question everything I knew about myself. And there, under the warm lights, with his hands on me, I realized I couldn't deny what was happening any longer. His touch wasn't accidental. It wasn't professional either. It was personal. Each moment that passed, each inch of fabric he adjusted, felt more intimate than the last. The way his hands lingered just a second too long. The way his eyes met mine in the mirror with a look that wasn't about the suit or the fitting. It was about something else. Something that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long, too afraid to be acknowledged. I tried to focus, tried to think about Sarah, about the life I'd promised her. But the more Antonio touched me, the more I couldn't ignore how alive I felt. Something was shifting, and it wasn't just my measurements. Hold still. Antonio's voice was low, close to my ear, and I could feel the warmth of his breath against my neck. It should have been awkward. It should have made me step back, put up a wall, but it didn't. Instead, I felt myself leaning into him, drawn by the magnetic pull I couldn't explain. The tension in the room was thick, almost suffocating. My breath, shaky, caught in my chest as he measured my waist. I could feel his hands brush over my ribs, feel the way they moved just slightly lower than necessary. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. His hands traced invisible lines on my body, and I was suddenly aware of every nerve, every muscle. A rush of desire I didn't expect flooded through me. This wasn't about fitting a tux anymore. This was about something raw and real, something that made my heart race with every movement. "You have an interesting build," Antonio said, his voice a little more hushed now, as though he was letting the words sink into the space between us. I tried to smile, to laugh it off, but my mind was racing. My heart was thumping loudly in my ears. What was this? Was I really feeling this way? The question hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I didn't have the answers. Instead, I felt exposed in a way I never had before. Antonio's hands worked with such care, yet each touch left me feeling more vulnerable, more uncertain. And the thing is, I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. Ready to admit the feelings I had spent so long pushing away, denying, burying deep inside me. But Antonio wasn't done yet. When he moved to measure my inseam, his body was inches from mine. I could feel his breath, could smell his cologne as it wrapped around me, making the air in the room heavier, more charged. And then, his hands moved higher. His fingers brushed the inside of my thigh, just long enough to make me question everything. Was this a mistake? Or was I finally facing the truth I had been too scared to confront? The quiet intensity of the moment was overwhelming. My mind screamed at me to pull back, to stop it before I did something I couldn't take back. But I didn't. I couldn't. The heat, the raw desire that was now radiating between us. It was too much. Antonio's hands weren't just touching me anymore. They were making me feel things I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. And as much as I tried to fight it, I knew this wasn't something I could ignore any longer. "Isn't professional," I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. Antonio paused, looking at me with those dark eyes, his expression intense. "You're right," he said softly, almost as though it was an admission, a confession. And in that moment, everything changed. The line between what was right and what was true blurred. This wasn't just about a tuxedo. It was about the truth we had both been avoiding, the truth that had been building between us for months, if not longer. I didn't know where this would go, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. Not when his hand was still resting on my chest, and the electric tension between us was impossible to ignore. I had to decide, would I push it away, or would I embrace this moment, this undeniable connection? The room felt smaller now, the air thicker, as if the walls were pressing in on us. I'd never been so aware of someone else's presence before, of how each breath felt like it was shared, how each second stretched on longer than the last. Antonio's fingers were still close to my skin, but it was no longer about the tux. It wasn't about measurements or even the fitting room. It was about something deeper. A question hanging between us, heavy, waiting to be asked. I had spent years of my life hiding parts of myself, parts that I never allowed myself to explore, not because I didn't feel them, but because I didn't know how to face them. There, standing in Antonio's shop, everything was different. He was different. He had been steady, calm, patient in a way I hadn't known I needed. And now, his hands weren't just measuring my body, they were unraveling the walls I had built up over the years. "James." Antonio's voice broke the silence, his gaze never leaving mine. It was soft but insistent. "When was the last time someone made you feel alive? Like every part of you was awake, every nerve was on fire?" His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd never been asked that question before, not by Sarah, not by anyone. Not in the way Antonio asked. This wasn't about physical attraction. This wasn't about the touch or the kiss or the heat between us. This was about something more, something I couldn't ignore anymore. The question lingered in the air, weighing me down. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, the truth slowly dawning on me as I stared at Antonio, his dark eyes locked with mine, waiting for an answer. But how could I answer? How could I put into words what I had been feeling all this time? How could I admit that in that moment, Antonio wasn't just a tailor to me, he was something more? Something I had never allowed myself to imagine, let alone pursue. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words, but all that came out was a whisper. Never, I admitted quietly. No one has ever made me feel like this. Antonio stood still for a moment, like he was letting my words sink in. His hand, which had been resting lightly on my chest, slid slowly to my side, and I felt the intensity of his touch in a way I couldn't describe. It was like he knew, deep down, that I was fighting something inside myself. But he didn't push, he just waited, like he understood that sometimes the most important answers take time to surface. "James," he said again, this time softer. "You've been holding back for so long, I can see it, I can feel it. You're scared to admit what you really want." It was like he had read my soul, because the truth was, I was scared. Scared of what this moment meant. Scared of what it might do to my life, my future. Scared of the fact that for the first time, I was realizing that the life I thought I wanted might not be the life that was meant for me. But Antonio didn't back off. Instead, he closed the distance between us. His body, strong and steady, was inches from mine. I could feel the heat radiating from him, and it made every rational thought in my head dissipate. In that moment, all I could think about was how he made me feel, how he saw me in a way no one else ever had. "You've been planning your life, James," he continued, his voice rough, but filled with understanding. "But what if it's time to stop planning and start living? What if the life you thought you wanted isn't the one you're meant to live? I want you to think about that." And that was it. That was the moment that broke everything wide open. The walls I had built, walls of security, comfort, and expectations, started to crumble. What if he was right? What if all these years of denying what I felt had been the real mistake? What if the future I had been building wasn't the one I truly wanted, but the one I thought I was supposed to want? I didn't have an answer, at least not yet. But what Antonio was giving me wasn't just a question. It was a chance to confront my truth, to acknowledge what had been stirring inside me for so long. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was hiding from myself. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't forcing myself into a box that didn't fit. The air between us was charged, but in a way that felt like freedom, like possibility. I don't know what to do with this," I confessed, my voice trembling slightly, unsure of the road ahead. "I've spent my life running from it. And now, I don't know where to go." Antonio smiled, the softness in his eyes telling me everything I needed to know. "You don't have to know right now, James. Just be honest with yourself. That's all I'm asking for." And in that moment, I knew he was right. The honesty was the first step, the hardest part. But once I took that first step, everything else, everything that felt uncertain, scary, and impossible, might just fall into place. Antonio was waiting for me to choose, to decide. But more than that, he was waiting to show me that sometimes the hardest choices lead to the most beautiful journeys. And maybe, just maybe, I was ready to start that journey now. It was as if time had frozen. There we were, standing in the heart of this moment, suspended in an uncomfortable silence. Antonio's gaze never left mine, his presence steady and undeniable, like the calm before a storm. His words hung in the air, soft yet powerful, a reminder that sometimes the hardest part is simply admitting the truth. "I want you," he said, his voice raw, vulnerable. There it was, the confession that I had tried to avoid, the feeling I had spent months running from. The truth, both beautiful and terrifying, that I could no longer deny. And in that instant, something in me shifted. The walls I had spent years building came crashing down. I wasn't ready for this. I didn't think I was. But there was no more hiding, no more pretending that I didn't feel it too. We both knew it. We both felt it. The undeniable attraction, the chemistry, the pull that had been there from the moment I first stepped into his shop. But I had buried it deep down, thinking I was making the right choice, thinking I was doing what society expected of me. But now, standing in front of Antonio, I realized how much I had been lying to myself. "I don't know what to do with this," I whispered, my voice shaky, the weight of the words pressing down on me. "I'm supposed to get married next month. I've planned my whole life around it. And now I don't know what's real anymore. Antonio didn't step back. He didn't retreat. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand resting on my chest, right above my heart. He was steady, grounding me, offering me the strength to confront the truth. And in that moment, I knew that this wasn't just about us, about the kiss we'd shared, about the feelings we were navigating. It was about me and my own journey to understanding who I was and what I truly wanted. He leaned in, his voice soft but unwavering. James, you don't have to know right now. But you do need to be honest with yourself. Not with me, not with Sarah, but with you. What do you really want? The question was a punch to the gut. For so long, I had avoided asking myself that. I had followed the path that was laid out for me, the one I thought was safe, predictable. But now, the idea of a life where I wasn't honest with myself felt suffocating. I took a deep breath, feeling my heart racing, my mind whirling in a million directions. I thought about Sarah, about our plans, about the life I was supposed to have. But in the quiet space between Antonio's words and his touch, I realized something crucial. What was I running from? Was I willing to sacrifice my truth for comfort, for stability, for fear of the unknown? I'm scared, I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I'm scared of what this means. I'm scared of losing everything I've worked for. I'm scared of hurting people I care about. Antonio's expression softened, and he stepped even closer, his eyes filled with understanding. You're scared, and that's okay. But being scared doesn't mean you shouldn't face it. It doesn't mean you should keep hiding from the truth. Sometimes the scariest things are the ones that can set us free. His words hit me like a revelation. I had been living in fear for so long. Fear of not fitting in. Fear of disappointing people. Fear of losing control. But here, with Antonio, I was starting to realize that maybe my fear had been holding me back from something greater. Something real. I don't know what will happen next, I said quietly, meeting his gaze. But I know that I can't keep pretending anymore. I can't keep ignoring what I feel. I don't want to. Antonio's face softened, his hand gently cupping my face as if he was grounding me in this moment. Then don't. Don't pretend anymore. Be real with yourself, James. You deserve that. The weight of his words, the weight of this moment settled into my chest. I had spent so much time trying to fit my life into a mold that wasn't mine, following a script that didn't resonate with who I truly was. And now, standing in front of Antonio, feeling his warmth, his care, and his presence, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I was actually choosing something for myself. I don't know what this means for my future, I whispered, a mix of fear and relief flooding my chest. But I do know that I can't walk away from this moment. Not now. Not after everything we've just said. Antonio nodded, his expression serious but tender. We don't have to know everything right now, but we do need to be honest. And this, right here, is where we start. Not with the fear, not with the doubts, but with what feels true. His words echoed in my mind as I let out a shaky breath. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from the truth. I wasn't hiding who I was. I wasn't pretending anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. In the midst of the uncertainty, the fear, the confusion, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Finally, really here. The road ahead was unclear, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I had chosen to face it honestly. I had chosen myself. Antonio and I didn't need all the answers right now, but we had taken the first step. And that was enough. The moment hung between us, heavier than any decision I'd ever had to make before. Antonio's words echoed in my mind, his question still raw in the air. What do you want, James? The truth was, I had never really asked myself that until now. It wasn't just about what I was supposed to want, not about the life I thought I was meant to lead. It was about what my heart was desperately telling me in that moment. I had spent so long running from my own truth, from feelings I didn't know how to process, and yet, here I was, standing on the precipice of something I couldn't take back. The fear that gripped me was palpable, suffocating almost. But underneath it all was something more powerful. A pull, a need, an undeniable desire. Antonio's hand rested on my chest again, the pressure gentle but firm, grounding me in that space. His touch was everything, comforting, soft, and yet charged with something far deeper than I had ever allowed myself to acknowledge. His gaze was steady, his eyes searching mine as though he could see all the pieces I had been hiding, the fears, the doubts, the yearning. What if this isn't the right choice? I thought to myself. But then, as I looked into Antonio's eyes, something clicked. I could no longer deny what was happening. I wasn't just standing here with him. I was standing on the edge of my own truth, and I had the power to either take the leap or retreat back to the life I thought was safe. In that moment, I understood something that had been eluding me for years. It's not the absence of fear that makes a leap of faith powerful. It's choosing to jump despite the fear. I had been hiding for so long, afraid of what I might find if I allowed myself to be truly honest with myself and with those I cared about. But standing here with Antonio's hand resting on me, the warmth between us felt like the beginning of something I had been craving without even realizing it. I want this, I thought. It wasn't just about the kiss. It was about choosing to finally be real, choosing to feel, to experience, to embrace the connection that had been growing between us from the very first moment we'd met. His lips were so close now, and the tension between us was palpable. I could feel my heart racing, the rhythm of it pounding in my ears. Antonio's breath was warm against my skin, his presence so intense, so electric, that it was almost impossible to think clearly. But in that moment, I didn't need to think. I didn't need to rationalize it or justify it. What mattered was the honesty between us, the truth of our connection, the pull that neither of us could ignore anymore. Then, as if we both reached the same conclusion at once, Antonio's lips were on mine. At first, it was gentle, tentative, as though he was giving me the space to pull away if I needed to. But I didn't. Instead, I kissed him back, and the world shifted. It wasn't like anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just about the physical contact. It was about finally feeling something I had spent so long denying. The kiss deepened, and everything else fell away. The fear, the confusion, the weight of expectations, it was all replaced by a clarity I had never known. I wasn't worried about the future anymore. I wasn't concerned about the consequences. In that moment, there was only him, only the connection we shared, only the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to be completely present, to embrace the moment without hesitation. The kiss felt like a promise to myself that I was finally letting go of the life I had been holding on to out of fear. And in return, Antonio gave me something I hadn't even known I needed. A safe space to be exactly who I was, to embrace the person I had been hiding from for so long. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless. But it wasn't just from the kiss. It was from the realization that this, whatever this was real. It wasn't a fleeting moment. It wasn't a mistake. It was a leap of faith, and we had both jumped. Antonio's eyes were soft, searching mine, and for the first time, I didn't feel uncertain. He wasn't just someone I had shared a moment with. He was someone I had chosen to be honest with, and that honesty had changed everything. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, his voice filled with the kind of vulnerability I hadn't expected. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure." I had taken the leap, and in that leap, I had found myself. And in a way, I had found Antonio too. The leap we had taken together wasn't just about us crossing a physical line. It was about both of us crossing the boundary of what we thought we knew about love, about desire, and about what it meant to truly be ourselves. And in that leap, I realized that sometimes the biggest risks lead to the most beautiful rewards. I wasn't ready to know exactly where this would take us, but for the first time, I was ready to find out. The first light of the morning filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. I lay there, tangled in the sheets, a mix of warmth and uncertainty swirling in my chest. It felt like the world had shifted overnight, like I had stepped into a new reality, one that was both exciting and terrifying all at once. Antonio lay next to me, his breath steady, his presence comforting. Yet the weight of what had happened between us loomed over me like a question that hadn't been answered yet. I closed my eyes, trying to sort through everything that had transpired in the past few hours. The kiss, the connection, the electricity that had sparked between us. It was undeniable. But now, as the sun began to rise and the reality of the situation began to settle in, I couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. Was this just a moment of passion, a fleeting escape from the life I had planned? Or was this the beginning of something deeper, something more lasting? I glanced at Antonio, still asleep beside me, his face relaxed, almost peaceful. It was hard to believe that just hours ago we had crossed a line, one that I had been too afraid to even acknowledge until now. The life I had spent years building, the future I thought I understood, all of it seemed uncertain in the face of what we had shared. The question that had been nagging at me since last night reared its head again. What now? What do I do with all these feelings, with this new understanding of who I am and what I want? The life I had planned with Sarah, the marriage, the stability. It all felt so distant now. What was I supposed to do with the truth that had surfaced? What did it mean for me, for Antonio, for everything I thought I knew? Antonio stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence felt heavier now, charged with all the unspoken things we both knew were still hanging in the air. I could feel the weight of the moment that could change everything. But it didn't feel like it was time to talk yet. It felt like we both needed a little more time to figure out what this meant. To figure out what we meant. "Morning," he said softly, his voice low and rough with sleep, as he turned to face me. "Morning," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. It felt surreal, like I was still trying to process everything that had happened. For a long moment, we just lay there, eyes meeting in a silence that felt strangely comfortable, despite the weight of the situation. It was like we were both waiting for the right words to break the silence, but neither of us knew what to say. "You good?" Antonio asked finally, his hand gently brushing my arm, as if to reassure himself that I was still here, still present in this moment with him. I nodded, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I was good. I wasn't sure what good even meant anymore. Was I good with everything that had happened? Was I good with how my entire world had been turned upside down in a single night? "I don't know," I admitted, my voice a little shaky. "I don't know what this means. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all of this." Antonio gave me a small, understanding smile, the kind of smile that made me feel like he saw me in a way that no one else did. "You don't have to know right now," he said quietly. "We don't have to have all the answers this morning. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." His words, simple and calm, were a comfort, but they didn't erase the storm that was still raging inside me. It wasn't just about what had happened between us. It was about everything that had led up to this moment. About the life I was supposed to lead, the choices I had made, and the person I thought I was. Now, everything felt uncertain. The future, once so clear, had become a blur of possibility and fear. I didn't know how to reconcile what I felt for Antonio with the life I had planned. But I knew one thing. This wasn't something I could ignore. This wasn't something I could push aside or pretend didn't matter. The way he made me feel, the way he saw me, it was real, it was raw, it was undeniable. "I'm scared," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I'm scared of what this means, what it means for my life, for Sarah, for everything." Antonio's expression softened, and he reached out to touch my face, his fingers brushing gently across my cheek. "I know, James, I'm scared too. But we can't keep living in fear of what might happen." Sometimes the scariest things lead to the most beautiful things. I closed my eyes, his words settling into me, a quiet truth that I wasn't ready to fully accept but couldn't deny. I had spent so much of my life living for others, for the expectations that had been placed on me. But now, standing on the precipice of something I couldn't control, I realized that maybe it was time to stop running. Maybe it was time to stop living for the life I thought I was supposed to have and start living for the life I truly wanted. "I don't know where this goes," I said, my voice still uncertain. "But I know I don't want to go back to pretending. I don't want to go back to the life I had before." Antonio smiled, a quiet, reassuring smile, as if he understood exactly what I meant. "We'll figure it out together," he said, his voice steady and calm, one step at a time. And in that moment, for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. Not because everything was clear, not because I had all the answers, but because I knew that I didn't have to have everything figured out. Not yet. I could take it slow. I could give myself the space to figure out who I was and what I wanted, and Antonio would be there, not asking for anything, but simply offering his presence, his understanding, and his support. As the morning light grew brighter and the storm outside began to fade, I realized that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, a new journey, not just with Antonio, but with myself. And maybe, just maybe, the storm I had feared for so long had been the thing that had finally cleared the air, letting me see the truth for what it was. The truth that I wasn't alone. The truth that I was allowed to choose my own path. And the truth that sometimes, the scariest decisions lead to the most beautiful transformations. We didn't have all the answers. But for the first time, we didn't need them. We just needed each other. As the day unfolded, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to the truest versions of ourselves. The night before, the weight of my decisions felt suffocating, like I was standing at a crossroads, unsure of which way to go. But now, with the clarity that comes only from facing our deepest truths, I understood that what I was choosing wasn't just about Antonio or the life I thought I was meant to lead. It was about choosing myself. I had spent so many years trying to fit into a mold I thought would bring me happiness. The life I had planned, the stability I thought was enough, had been built on what others expected of me. But in that moment, standing at the edge of something new, I saw that I had been holding myself back from living authentically. And the truth was, it wasn't just about being with Antonio. It was about stepping into a life where I no longer had to pretend, a life where I could fully embrace who I was without fear or shame. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was terrifying. The risks were real. The risk of losing friends, of disappointing my family, of walking away from a future that seemed so certain. But the real risk, the one that terrified me the most, was the risk of never knowing what could be. Of staying in the comfort of what was known, never daring to explore what could truly make me happy. And so, I took that step. I chose to leave behind the life I thought was right and embrace the unknown. I chose love, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was true. I chose Antonio, not because he was the answer to everything, but because with him, I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. The path ahead isn't clear. There are still questions, still doubts, but one thing is certain. I'm no longer afraid of the unknown. In fact, I'm embracing it. Because sometimes, the most important parts of our lives come from the moments we can't control, the ones that come unexpectedly and force us to choose between what's comfortable and what's real. As I look ahead, I know the road will be challenging, but it's also full of possibilities. The journey is just beginning, and I'm ready to walk it with open eyes, an open heart, and no fear of the unknown. For the first time, I'm living for myself, choosing the love and life that I truly want, not the one others told me to have. And that, I think, is what makes all the difference. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the pull of choosing authenticity over comfort, then take a moment and reflect on your own life. Are there areas where you're holding back, too afraid to step into the truth of who you are? It's never easy, but it's always worth it. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of real, raw connections. Subscribe for more stories that challenge us to live fully and authentically. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that it's okay to choose love, to choose yourself, and to take that leap into the unknown. Because sometimes the best decisions we make are the ones that scare us the most. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Create it. Let's keep this conversation going. What's the biggest risk you've taken for love or for yourself? Comment below and share your story. Let's inspire each other to live fearlessly.